Well, hello there, gunfighters. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, equipment, the right way, with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, which means taking no bribes from gun companies or anybody else to tell you what's good and what isn't, or to tell you to buy the next cool hot thing. And I say that specifically for today's episode because today's episode is going to be on the top combat handguns in 2024. Now, these are not the top handguns coming out or that have come out recently, because I would not recommend those, because I would be recommending you get something and trust your life to it that is not proven. If you want to get that because you're a gun collector or because you just want to go have fun at the range, that's fine, but why would you trust your life to something unproven? Any manufacturer of any gun, Glock, Smith & Wesson, Colt, some of the best. When a new model comes out, it has issues. So you're probably familiar with the 3-year rule. So I'm not going to recommend anything brand new, because why would I if you're going to trust your life to it? If it's a combat handgun or a defensive handgun, why would I recommend something that's not proven to you? Because some hot thing on YouTube or because they're touting it as a game changer? No, not here. With that caveat, nothing crazy brand new that's not proven. Also, nothing super old and obscure, as it still needs to be manufactured. I'm sticking to guns that are currently being manufactured at the time of this recording. Also, these are full-size combat handguns. There will probably be another one on smaller guns, but even though smaller guns have come a long way, so have large combat handguns, and they're not going to compare, if you're talking about firepower, shootability, all that, to a full-size fighting handgun. Now, I carry a full-size fighting handgun generally as my CCW. My concealed carry right now, I'm carrying a SIG 226. And I would recommend that for the reasons I just stated, that they're more shootable, more controllable. Other reasons: higher capacity, easier to clear malfunctions, you get more purchase area to manipulate the weapon, you get longer sight radius, you get a longer barrel, which means even for the same caliber you get higher velocity. There are many reasons. Just so you know, that's what we're talking about today: a full-size fighting handgun, combat handguns. Alright, enough of the caveats. I am going to put in a bio. Skip around 2 minutes if you don't care, if you heard it before, but I think it's important because you should ask yourself, why am I listening to this dude? Whether it's this podcast or anybody else, any book, any video, why are you listening to that person? Do they have actual experience, credibility, or are they just taking a bribe? Are they just taking money or pushing a product on you, or are they just saying what they like? There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with gun entertainment. But if you're looking for real-world first-hand experience, that's a big reason I started the podcast. For that reason, on this episode, I will put in the bio. Skip around 2 minutes if you don't want to hear it. I'll roll into a quick, abbreviated bio and then into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as an instructor, an urban warfare instructor and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the LAPD, both full-time as a sworn police officer and some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a FBI firearms instructor, still am an FBI firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years, also NRA certified and some other 3-letter government agency certified. I've been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast, and elk and bear and wolf, and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. Enough about me, guys. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and fingers for battle. Let's get into today's topic. Alright, number 1, full-size fighting handgun in 2024. The Staccato XL. The Staccato XL is perhaps the number 1 on the market. So, now, if you're not familiar, Staccato used to be STI. I have experience running STIs both in real-world street scenarios. That was my go-to gun as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters. I also competed with it. The same gun that was on my hip. That just made sense. They kind of did a transition a few years ago from mostly competition to they more kind of rebranded themselves, I think, towards a duty gun. But ironically, the only actual full-size 1911-ish that I'm aware they make is the Staccato XL, one model. All the other ones are dramatically neutered, in my opinion. They've been cut off. A 1911 is a 5-inch barrel. The only one I'm aware they make is the Staccato XL. That will be the one that I recommended if it was for a full-size fighting handgun. Why am I giving up? It's not like, I don't know why, especially if you're carrying, with a gun this size, you're probably carrying strong side hip, right? You're probably not carrying appendix, so why are you getting rid of the extra barrel? It's not like you can't conceal it. I don't know. But they do make the Staccato XL. If you're not familiar, it's a 2011. It's a double stack 1911. All the shootability and controllability, even more so than as a traditional 1911, with double stack 9mm capability. I think standard is 21 rounds. You can also get 26 round capacity if you want. Capacity is not even in the top 10 reasons why I love these guns. They just shoot beautifully. They drive like a Ferrari. Comparing it to, like, let's say a Glock 17 would be like comparing a Ferrari to a Volkswagen Beetle. They'll both get you down the road, but you're not driving the same thing. They're a phenomenal gun. They, I think, deserve the number 1 spot. The Staccato XL. It does appear optics cut. Now, I have what I would consider the older version of this before they were Staccato. I have the STI Marauder. It is a beautiful, beautiful handgun. I don't generally carry it anymore because they don't make that gun anymore, and I can't justify cutting it into a convertible and getting it cut for an optic. It saddens me to think about that thing and slicing the top off. One day I may just do it. I may just literally cut the top off and make it optics ready. But anyway, it is a phenomenal gun, and it certainly deserves the number 1 spot, I think. I don't like to talk about prices with inflation. They might go up between the time I record this and the time you listen to it. But what I will say is, it is not cheap. You can buy a decent used car or used truck for what one of these guns cost. If you're allowed to carry one of these, however, and your job is to save people's lives, you might look at not going with the bargain basement sidearm if you don't have to. And likely you might have, if you get this gun or something like it, one of the other guns on the list, you might have it quite a bit longer than you'll have a vehicle. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Wilson Combat. I don't think they need any introduction from me if you don't know about Wilson Combat. You may not have heard of Staccato, but you probably have certainly heard of Wilson Combat. Wilson Combat makes the FX9. I actually have one of these on order before I got the carry gun that I'm now carrying, and I literally had it on order, and I thought, surely with this gun it's going to come cut for an optic. And at the time it didn't, so I was going to have to get it and get it cut for an optic, which ticked me off, so I canceled my order literally after I paid for it. But now it looks like it does come with an optic, or at least an option to be cut with an optic. They make the full-size one, the SFX 9 5-inch. Looks like it's cut for an optic. It is basically a double stack 1911. I would put it second after the STI. The STI platform was just more proven for me. They've been around a lot longer. This gun has still been around the 3-year mark, and it doesn't seem to have any issues. It's not as proven, but it's a fantastic gun. So if you're looking at something, and for some reason, if you're looking at like the double stack 1911 Arena, and for some reason you like this one over the STI, I would have no problem with it. It's a phenomenal gun, phenomenal choice. Wilson Combat makes phenomenal stuff. If for whatever reason you like this better, you like McLaren better than Ferrari, whatever the case is, right? It's a beautiful, beautiful firearm that appears to work very well. Again, it's not a new kid on the block. It's been around a while, and it seems to work just fine. All the things I said about the Wilson Combat, shootability, ergonomics, all the things you might love about a 1911 that have kept it around for over a century, that beautiful, exquisite trigger pull, all that stuff. And I don't just mean light, because a lot of people today think light, oh, I make my trigger light and it's a good trigger. You can have a light garbage trigger. I'm talking crisp, clean, beautiful. I think both these guns will have that. Now, after introducing these first two guns, that'll be my first and my second one. This one also is not cheap, so don't think that you're getting this one for a bargain. And any double stack 1911 you think you're getting at a bargain, just a caveat, you're not. Yeah, like these guns, I don't think they're overpriced. I think they cost what they cost because that's what it costs to make a good 1911. I don't think that Wilson Combat or Staccato is taking you to the cleaners. 1911s require quite a bit of hand fitting, hand tuning. You got to pay for that. If you want a cheap double stack 1911 to take to the range, get a Springfield or one of the other ones that have come out, budget on the market, but don't expect that to be a life-saving tool. Just like if you want to get a cheap Chinese tourniquet to practice with and play with and train with, that's fine, but I wouldn't use it as my EDC. Right? I would get a proper cat tourniquet or something like it. That's the best analogy I can think of right now. These guns are not cheap. That's one of the downfalls and one of the things talking about these first two picks. 1911s, they're from a bygone era. What is that quote from Star Wars? They're a more elegant weapon from a more civilized age. I don't know about that because World War I, where it made its big debut, I think not very civilized. That was a nasty war. But it was from a time where men were craftsmen and they hand fit stuff and hand tune stuff. And this gun requires a lot of that. So to be made well, they require labor. And labor is expensive, especially here in America. So again, if you want a good, especially double stack 1911, I would not recommend cheap. Now, I'm not saying you have to go with the double stack 1911. They are not without their foibles, without their quirks. A 1911, if you're not familiar, if you've never been in a relationship with a 1911 as a duty gun, as a carry gun, as a hard use gun, they require a bit more finesse. They are a bit more high maintenance of a gal than a Glock or a Smith & Wesson M&P or many other things. Going back to that hand-fitted parts, there's a lot that has to interact together and play well together for it to run. And I've said this before, and I think I've run this in training. If you have a good, well-tuned double stack 1911 like an STI, I think they can absolutely be as reliable as a Glock. I know, I said it. If you maintain your gun, exchange parts regularly, do maintenance on your gun regularly, and what I found for a good, really tight-fitting 1911 or STI, about 250 rounds before it starts giving me issues. Yeah, and you can go 1,000 rounds with a Glock. But again, it's not the same experience. You're not driving the same car. So you may not want that. You may not be willing to put in the work and the maintenance. You may not be willing to tune an extractor. Or, for instance, I once worked with a SWAT guy. He was telling me how he initially liked 1911s, and I think he was working for a department where they bought his ammo, and he shot X amount of thousands of rounds to his 1911 and it broke, so he didn't like them. Well, you're supposed to change the recoil spring on a 1911 every 1,000 rounds. That's like saying you bought a brand new, to stick with the Ferrari analogy, you bought a brand new Ferrari, you drove it for 3 years, never changed the oil, and it died, so Ferraris suck. Right? That's not how you drive a Ferrari. You change the oil in it. Like a 1911, they're designed to have the recoil spring, that main spring underneath the barrel, that's designed to be changed every 1,000 rounds. Maybe you are not willing to do that. If you're willing to spend that much money on a nice 1911, 2011, probably you don't care about the $6.99 or $7.99 or under $10 it is for a good recoil spring. You just have a couple in your gun case. But they do require that, and they do require more upkeep and maintenance. So that's a caveat. I'm also recommending these, I didn't put this in the initial caveats, but for CONUS work, Continental United States. Something where you can give your gun regular maintenance, right? These two would not be my first choices if I was recommending an apocalypse gun, a peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan gun, I'm taking a government contract and deploying to the mountains of Afghanistan, right? These would not be the guns I would recommend for that. I'm recommending more CONUS type police work where after I've shot 250 rounds, I can clean my gun. And I can clean it with proper oil and lube. And I have tools and a workbench to maintain it, to tune that extractor. So that's the caveat there. The next one I'm going to recommend, and this is the one that's on my hip. Because although I have in the past, and especially when I'm wearing a duty belt, I will carry a STI 2011. They're a little bit heavy for even me day to day, and I carry a full-size fighting handgun. They're in the 40-ish ounce range. I've come to find that about the 35-ish ounce range is generally what I can carry all day without being encumbered, without being able to have my belt get pulled down or whatever. But anyway, the next one on the list is basically the one that I have on my hip. I have an older model. I bought it used for a screaming deal. And mine predated the optics cut model, so I had mine direct cut for a Trijicon RMR. And in fact, all the ones I'm going to recommend today are going to be cut for an optic because it's 2024. Even if you don't think you want to run an optic right now, I don't know why you would buy a gun in 2024 that was not cut for an optic, for a handgun, for a full-size fighting handgun. You might make the case if you're talking about like a backup gun or something, you don't want an optic. I get it. But again, even if you don't want to run an optic, why wouldn't you get a gun cut for an optic in 2024? Anyway, the Sig Sauer Legion 226, single action only. I specify single action only. If you're a double single action guy, that's fine, but you had better walk down the aisle with it. That requires quite a bit of training, and unless all your guns are double single, I would not recommend carrying or using a double single for duty unless, again, you're going to walk down the aisle with it. That's not me. I prefer single action only, hammerback safety on. The Sig Sauer 226 Legion SAO, single action only, lets you do that. It's cut for an optic. It's a beautiful gun. If memory serves correct, it weighs like 34 ounces. It's metal on metal. It is aluminum, not steel, but it is metal on metal. It is hammer fired, which means it has an exquisite trigger. Is it as good as a 1911, an STI Staccato, a Colt Gold Cup? No, it is not, but it is very, very good. Much better than just about any polymer striker fired handgun factory trigger you're going to get. Again, light is not good. It's probably heavier than some polymer spongy, squishy triggers. But it's not spongy and it's not squishy, which again, people think that trigger pull is only weight. It's not only weight. Weight is one little tiny part of the equation. Again, it's an exquisite trigger. It's also, going to the other point, it's a much more rugged design. I love 1911s, but they do require that more upkeep and maintenance. This does not. This is a much simpler design. It's very forgiving as far as maintenance goes. It's an exquisite combat handgun. The Sig 226, I don't think requires any... Well, maybe it does. It's one of the greatest combat handguns of all time. The one that beat it, I'm going to talk about after I talk about these handguns, but this one is exquisite. I am specifying single action only. I'm specifying the Legion cut for an optic. It's a great model. Also, 601 half a dozen of the other, a really, really good model that's similar in all the points, depending on what flavor you like. I would go with the Legion, but they do make the ZevTech. ZevTech kind of makes their own version, their own flavor of very similar, single action only. It's got some kind of Gucci cuts in the slide and stuff like that. Nothing wrong with that. It shouldn't affect the function of it at all. It's cut for an optic, has a threaded barrel, but it's very similar in form and function to the Legion SAO. And it's been around a while now. I think it's getting up on that 3-year mark. So either one of those in the Sig 226. Alright, now the one that beat it And I recommended this one first because it's the one that's on my hip, so it would be hypocritical of me not to. But when I got this gun, these guns did not exist. Or at least, I don't think they were out at the 3-year mark. And I've learned the hard way, that's how I came up with that 3-year rule. That was something that came out after the painful experience of getting guns that just came out that were supposed to be the new game changer that didn't work. But anyway, if these guns were out, they probably weren't out at the 3-year mark yet. I think they are now. The Beretta 92X Performance. Now, I have said before, I think the Beretta 92 is the finest combat handgun ever fielded. It's neck and neck there with the 226, but the Beretta has a lot going for it. One thing it didn't have going for it as a modern carry gun was the double single action. Again, if you really want to walk down the aisle with that, that's fine, but it's kind of dated. It's kind of like the fanny pack or the mullet, which they may try and bring back in style, but come on. Anyway, with that, I prefer single action hammerback safety on. If you prefer another operating system, that's fine. But the Beretta 92X Performance, a fine handgun. I think that the Beretta operating system is better. I think that drop-down locking lug design is a superior design. I think the open top slide is a superior design. That's why I think it is a little bit better than the SIG. The SIG is a great, probably the best conventional design, meaning like Browning tilting barrel system. But I think that design, although it's cheap and simple, is not the best. I think the Beretta has a better design. And no matter how finely made you make a gun, I don't know if you're going to compete with that better design to begin with. So I like that system. I like the barrel staying in a linear line. I have found it to be quite a bit more accurate, especially with different loads. I like the open top design. It can greatly reduce some malfunctions, which is a good thing in a combat handgun. And the Beretta 92X Performance gives you that capability with the ability to carry hammerback safety on. The only one I'm aware of before this was some really early prototypes and the Millennium, which was kind of more of a high-grade collector's finely polished gun. This seems to be a decent combat handgun. The Beretta 92X Performance and the Beretta 92X. The difference being, I believe the Performance has a steel frame, which makes it quite a bit heavy if you're going to carry on a normal belt. If you're going to carry on a duty belt, it makes no difference. The Beretta 92X, however, has the traditional alloy frame, but still lets you carry hammerback safety on. Phenomenal guns. Either of those models. I know they did just come out with the Beretta 92XI. I don't think that one's hit the 3-year mark yet, but I do believe the Beretta 92X and the 92X Performance have. Or if not, they're much closer. And I think the Beretta 92X Performance has. So you might want to look at those. Also, if you just want the traditional double single, it's still a fine combat handgun. If you're looking for the bargain, just a regular Beretta M9 or 92, especially like a police trade-in, because most cops don't shoot that much, you can get those for a song and a dance. So if you're looking for a value on here and you're willing to deal with the double single, you really want to look at the Beretta 92 in my opinion. They do still make the more traditional models. Again, if you want the double single, I think that is great for a combat handgun, where like let's say your fob is getting attacked and you're in general when you're inside the wire. Difference between military, which is why people often look to the military and think, what do they do? What do they carry? Does that even apply to you? Because here's the deal. If you're carrying a handgun in the military, as I did sometimes, that is not your primary weapon. And most of the time when we were carrying a handgun inside in garrison, we carried condition 3. Magazine in, loaded magazine in, no round in chamber, slide forward. Meaning we had to rack it. But that's fine if our fob, if our forward operating base is getting attacked and we're running up to the wire, then we rack the slide as we're running up to the wire. As we're, running up to the attack. Or like I carried both an M16 and a Beretta as a Marine, and I qualified with both in the Army. But like, let's say the Army, when I was in Cav, when I was in 1st Cavalry, that's not my primary weapon. My primary weapon is a tank. Right? Or a machine gun on the tank. Or in the Marines, it was a rocket launcher or a satchel charge, which is 20 pounds, 16 1 1/4 pound sticks of C4. right? That was my primary thing. The handgun was a just in case. If you are either law enforcement or an armed civilian, part of a well-regulated citizenry, right? And that's what you have on you while you're out and about. That's your primary. You can say all you want about your handgun is to fight your way to your rifle, but if you're out and about as a citizen and the handgun is what you have on you, that's your primary at the time. So it's apples and oranges. You're not really comparing the two. And with the CCW gun, those encounters are often quick, dirty, nasty for law enforcement as well, which is why they don't generally carry without a round in the chamber. In fact, I don't recommend that at all for anybody, unless it's, again, like a backup gun. It's in your pack or something. In that case, that's fine. But if it's on you and you're going to need it right away, probably I wouldn't count on being able to rack to slide in time. Those situations, again, are often, not always, but often quick, dirty, nasty, and over quickly. And you want to change that person's behavior if you have to, right? It's probably because they're trying to kill you or somebody else. You might want to change your behavior right quick. Anyway, the point of that is double single, great for a combat handgun, perhaps maybe a better system, but for civilian concealed carry or for a police officer, I don't think it's a good option. I'd much prefer single action only hammerback safety on. It's my primary. That's why I recommended those models. If you really, 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 really train with a double single, you can get good and fast with that first double action and get accustomed to right after that, okay, I have a completely different trigger pull. But again, that's train, even more than you normally would with another system. And again, kind of walk down the aisle with it, because that can get you into trouble if you switch back and forth between different operating systems. It's quite a bit different than most other systems. Anyway, with that, I realized that today the modern marketing is polymer striker fired guns. They dominate the market. I don't think they're as good. I don't think you almost ever get as good a trigger pull, which is a major thing. The point of a gun is to hit a given target, unless it's just a collector piece or a, Tiffany blue decoration. If it's a fighting gun, the point is to hit a given target, and I think trigger is a big part of that. So for that reason, I prefer hammer fired guns, but I do realize that today, I think mostly because of affordability, the polymer striker fire, because they're so much cheaper to produce, is the standard. So for that, it would be remiss of me to not talk about polymer striker fired handguns. And since we talked a little bit about military, the number one that I'm going to recommend, the M17. I know you probably thought I was going to say Glock, but I didn't. Glock might have been a top pick 20 years ago. There's so many good polymer striker fired handguns on the market. I don't know why you would go with a Glock other than you're just a dyed-in-the-wool Glock guy, and Glock and everybody knows Glock, and I already have Glock magazines, and Glock is the best. But if you're not that guy and you look at it objectively, and I have a Glock. I run a Glock. I've carried a Glock on duty, both as a private contractor and a law enforcement officer. And I may again someday if I decide to take up a contract and that's what they have and that's what I have to run. But if I have my choice, even if they dictate polymer striker fire, it wouldn't even be in the top several picks. The top pick I'm going to pick today is the M17. It's a full-size fighting handgun. It's our military's new combat handgun. Again, I put it after the Beretta, but it's proven, right? It's been around for more than 3 years. It's an evolution of the 320, and I'll probably talk about some models of the 320. It doesn't have a hammer fire trigger, but it has a pretty good trigger for a polymer striker fired handgun. With that caveat, it's got a pretty good trigger. The M17 comes cut for an optic. Again, talk about military proven. I actually didn't want to like this gun at all. I got one so I could beat it up and test it and try it out. And I actually really do like that. If you want more on that, I did a whole episode on, I think, the gun that I hate to love. But it's a good gun for a polymer striker fired handgun. Much more affordable than many of the guns I've talked about thus far. And it's a good option. And it's quite a bit lighter than I think most of the guns I've discussed thus far. It's like 20 in the mid 20-ish ounces as opposed to the mid 30-ish ounces. Again, comes optics cut. The military has not spewed it out of its mouth. It's a good combat handgun. If you want a polymer striker fired one, that's the one I'm going to recommend. It's also modular, which I think was kind of a weird criteria for the military, because I don't see a Marine going up to the cage and saying, you know what, Private Smith, what do you feel like today? Do you feel like a small grip or a medium grip? Let me measure your hands. What size glove do you wear? They're probably going to say, here's your handgun, sign the hand receipt. I don't see how the modularity comes into play there, the modularity. But for you, I absolutely think it comes into play, because you can do that. You can decide, you know what, I like the 1911, its ergonomics, the way that it points. I'm going to get a 1911 stylish, more 1911 stylish. I'm going to go to the Wilson Combat and spend a little bit of money and get a 1911 grip, or polymer 80 grip for my 320, or just get a different size. I think for you as a citizen, you have a lot more freedom and can take a lot more advantage of that, because if you don't know, it's a modular system. That whole fire control unit you can take out. You can change virtually anything on that gun, and the fire control unit is a serialized part. So that's an added bonus, which I think makes a lot more sense for you than it does for the military. The next one I'm going to recommend, I will briefly mention the SIG X5s. They make a 320 version. I think it's more geared towards competition, but as somebody that's carried a STI for both duty and competition, which part of that don't you like, the fast part or the accurate part? If I was going with something like that, I would prefer to go to a hammer-fired gun, but if you want the 320 X5 or the 320 Legion, it exists. It's out there. It's not a bad option. And I should also briefly mention, they do make the 226 X5, and they've had various versions of that over the years. I'm not sure how long the current version has been in production, so I don't know if I'd recommend it, but if it has and it's proven, you may look into that X5 226. On the polymer striker fire train, going to a different manufacturer, the HK VP9. The HK VP9 is a good gun for a polymer striker fired handgun. If you want a polymer striker fired handgun and you don't mind spending a little bit more money on magazines, you may look at the VP9. It's been around a while now. It's not a spring chicken. It's not new. It's been around quite a while. Proven, kind of a sleeper, but absolutely I think deserves to be on this list. You might think with that I'd recommend the FNs. I do not. I do not recommend anything in the FN 509 kind of family. I would not recommend them at all. I have had nothing but issues with those. But the HK VP9, I think, is a fine gun. As far as polymer striker fired triggers go, it is good. And the next one I'm going to talk about is the Walther. Also kind of a sleeper, but the Walther PDP. Kind of made as a duty combat handgun. It's not going to be as common. The mags aren't going to be as common. You might not find them at your local store, but it's a very, very good gun. Very good optics mounting system, which is important. They make a full-size version. It has, I think they're kind of ugly, to be honest, but that doesn't make them a bad gun. Just kind of like I think Spyderco knives are ugly. They're good knives. I just don't like the aesthetics. I actually don't like the aesthetics of the Walther PDP, but they feel really good in the hand. Bad aesthetics does not mean bad ergonomics. They have good ergonomics. They are fairly modular. They have a good optics mounting system, and they have a very good trigger for a polymer striker fired trigger. All right. With that, I guess I have to put a Glock on the list, because some people are just Glock, and it's got to be Glock. If I'm picking a Glock for this, I think, except for the old Gen 1s, which are off the table because they're no longer being made, the best Gen is the Gen 5. Finger grooves. No, just finger grooves. Not cool. So Gen 5s don't have a finger groove. They also have some other design features that are minuscule that I won't get into. like actual rifling instead of polygonal rifling, which I prefer, or polygonal rifling, however you want to enunciate that. There are benefits and detriments to both, but I like the Glock Gen 5 barrels. I also like their lack of finger grooves. Less is more there. So Gen 5 and a Glock 17 would be fine. I would probably recommend a 34. Because, I think a full-size handgun is a 5-inch, and the closer I can get to that, the better. And since I can get a longer barrel in the 34, why wouldn't I? And they do make a Gen 5 in the 34. They don't make a Gen 5 in the 17L, which would be cool. But anyway, a Gen 5 34 would be fine. It would be a fine, serviceable combat handgun. The 17 also would be. But again, I don't get like the trend towards a shorter barrel, because if I'm carrying a gun this size, I'm probably carrying it muzzle down, strong side hip. Probably not appendix carrying a Glock 17. I could be wrong. I don't prefer appendix carry in general. But a gun that size, you're probably carrying strong side hip, in which case, what do you care how long the barrel is, as long as it's not like the Batman Joker revolver going down to your knee. What difference does it make how long the barrel is? So why would you give up the extra velocity, the extra shootability, the extra ability to clear malfunctions and everything with the longer barrel, longer sight radius? Anyway, so for those reasons, I would go with the Glock Gen 5 34. And that's not an all-exhaustive list. There are many. I mean, there are a smorgasbord. Again, polymer striker-fired handguns dominate the market. There are tons of them. I'm going to give you one kind of wild card here. If you don't want 9mm, I mean, 40 Smith & Wesson is kind of a dead cartridge, but 45 still has some advantages. I mean, 9mm is the de facto defensive handgun caliber of our time, and I think for good reason. But if you want a 45, the one that I would recommend for a modern combat handgun, I mentioned I'm not a big fan of the FN 509 series, and I'm not, and I stand by that. But the FNX 45, lovingly referred to as the Tactical Wheaties box, that's a fine gun. It is polymer, but it is not striker fired. It is hammer fired. You can carry it hammerback safety on. Double stack 45. Comes cut for an optic. It's a big beefy gun. You'd better have fairly big meat hooks, fairly big hands. But if you do and you're willing to carry a gun that big, that FNX 45, if you want a 45 and a modern combat handgun, still being made, it's a big gun. It's bordering on a crew serve handgun, but it's doable, especially in duty rig. So anyway, you might consider the FNX 45 if you want a big modern 45. Ironically, I can't think of any good high quality double stack 45 1911 like 2011s being made. They used to when it was STI, but they went to Staccato, and now they, I think, only make 9mm, and I'm not aware of any. There may be one. It used to be the Para Ordnance, but they got bought up by Remington and that whole debacle. The older Para Ordnances are good, but I said currently being manufactured. So for that, ironically, I mentioned some 1911s and 9mm, but if you want a good modern double stack 45, it's going to be the FNX 45. Anyway, I think that's going to be enough. Again, there are many more that I didn't mention that you may like for a certain reason, but I think that'll round out the top combat handguns in 2024. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Your tactical tip of the day. You want to get good with a handgun, practice. Number one, dry fire. I'm big on that. That's not your tactical tip of the day. You should be doing that anyway. Get a 22. Doesn't have to be exactly the same, but get one analogous to what you're going to be fighting with. We started off with 1911s. Get a 1911 and 22. There are many. Get one to train with so that you're good with it. You're gonna run a Glock, fine. Get the Glock in 22 or a Glock conversion kit from like Tactical Solutions and train in 22. If you're practicing the draw, you can do a lot more reps, a lot more affordably with the 22 than you can with 9mm and certainly with 45. So if you don't yet have one and you have a bunch of handguns, a bunch of ARs, and you're looking at the next cool combat handgun, you already have a decent one, perhaps get a 22 training partner for your gun. It doesn't have to be identical, but probably something with a similar manual of arms. Meaning you rack the slide the same way, you clear malfunction the same way, you do a tactical reload the same way. Anyway, that's your tactical tip of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. I mentioned in the beginning, I don't take bribes on this show. I'm not going to tell you buy the next cool thing, hot thing on YouTube that may or may not work when you're trusting your life to it and you get killed because I'm trying to make a dime. Not here. Tactical verse of the day. You shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. In righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. You shall not go about as a talebearer among your people, nor shall you take a stand against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's a ton of good stuff in that short verse. That short passage is several verses, a short passage. Some versions have this translated, you shall not take a stand against the life of your neighbor. Some versions translate that, I think, more clearly in our modern English, maybe not more correctly, but easier to understand, and you shall not stand idly by while somebody takes the life of your neighbor. You should, I hope, feel as passionate about protecting the life of those around you, the women, the children, the orphan, the widow, the little old lady. You should feel as passionate about protecting their lives as you do your own. You shall not stand idly by while somebody takes the life of your neighbor. You want to stop active shooters? Be armed. It's not a cop's job. It's not the government's job. It's your responsibility as a man, as made in the image of God, to protect life, yours and others. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Are you just carrying a gun to protect yourself if you get mugged at the ATM, in which case you might be carrying an LCP? Are you thinking you may have to stop an active shooter or stop somebody else's life from being ended? You shall love your neighbor as yourself. In that case, you might want a more capable fighting handgun. And there's a lot more into that than just handguns, right? It just goes into that mindset. And mindset is important. You could have the greatest, fanciest combat handgun with the best optics and the best hollow points. If you're not willing to take a stand and stand up while somebody tries to take the life of your neighbor, what good is it? What good is it? Anyway, with that, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.